The Galactic Council Chamber was not a place designed for comfort. It was a declaration of power, built from cold, blue-tinted metal that reflected the harsh light from floating holographic displays. The air hummed with a low, mechanical energy, the sound of a galaxy's bureaucracy at work. In the center of the vast, circular room was a raised dais where the council members sat, their forms imposing and alien. Standing on the lower floor, feeling very small, were the two human diplomats. Jin-Soo was a man in his 50s, his hair streaked with gray, his face a careful mask of patience. Beside him stood Ji-hyun. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with a delicate frame that seemed even smaller in her simple dark gray suit. She looked more like a student than an ambassador. Counselor Forlak, the leader of the session, dominated the room. He was a massive being from a heavy-gravity world, with thick, chitinous skin the color of dried blood and 4 powerful arms. His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated in the chest. The petition from the Terran delegation is now under review, Forlak announced, not even looking at them as he scanned a data stream. Your request for a defensive fleet allocation to protect your sol system is denied. Jin-Soo, who had spent decades in these halls, did not show his frustration. He simply bowed his head slightly. Counselor Forlak, with all due respect, the Xylos horde moves closer to our sector every cycle. Without support, our world will be consumed. Many worlds will be consumed, Forlak replied, finally turning his large, multifaceted eyes toward them. The galactic fleet must be deployed where it can be most effective. The Xylos are a tide of claws and plasma. They shred battle fleets and devour planetary defenses. What strategic value does your humanity offer to this war effort? Your species is new, and from our scans, soft. Your history is a brief, quiet whisper in the galaxy. Jin-Soo took a small step forward. Our value is not in warships, but in resilience, Counselor. We have faced extinction-level threats before. Our history, while short, is a testament to survival. A wave of sound filled the chamber. It was not laughter as humans knew it, but a series of derisive clicks, chitters, and low rumbles from the various council members. The sound was mocking and cold. Forlak made a gesture with one of his lower hands, a clear sign of dismissal. Extinction? From what? A change in your climate? A few planetary conflicts? We have scanned your historical records. Your wars were petty squabbles over resources and ideology. You have no concept of true, galactic-scale war. You have not earned the right to our protection. It was then that Ji-hyun spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and firm, cutting through the alien noise like a sharp knife. Our greatest war, she said, was not against ourselves. The chamber grew quieter, the council members turning their attention to the young woman who had dared to speak. She looked so small. It was against a foe you have never faced, Ji-hyun continued, her gaze fixed on Forlak. A foe that left no monuments to destroy, no cities to ruin. It only left scars. Forlak leaned forward, his large frame casting a shadow over the two humans. He pointed a thick, clawed finger directly at Ji-hyun. The gesture was aggressive, meant to intimidate. You? He boomed, his voice full of disbelief. You speak of wars and great foes? Look at you. You stand there so fragile. I believe a strong breeze from a ventilation shaft would knock you over. The council's laughter returned, louder this time. It was a unified, cruel sound. They were all looking at Ji-hyun, this tiny human who spoke of survival against impossible odds. She thinks she's a warrior, Forlak declared to the entire council, and this time the laughter was unmistakable, even in its alien tones. Jin-Soo winced, his shoulders tightening. He looked at Ji-hyun, expecting to see shame or fear on her face, but he saw neither. Her posture remained straight. Her hands, clasped in front of her, were steady. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a deep, unshakable certainty. She did not flinch from Forlak's pointing claw or the wall of scornful sound. She didn't doubt the truth of her words for a single second. She had known this would happen. She had known they would look at her physical form and see only weakness. They could not see the history she carried inside her, a history every human knew in their bones. She knew the truth of human strength, a truth these beings, for all their power, could never understand. The laughter eventually died down, replaced by a silence filled with expectation. They were waiting for her to crumble, to apologize, to back down. Ji-hyun simply stood her ground. She had said what she needed to say. The seed was planted. Now she had to make it grow. She met Forlak's gaze and held it, her dark eyes unwavering. The massive counselor, for the first time, felt a flicker of something unexpected. It was not respect. It was the first small prickle of doubt. This human was not behaving as she should. There was no fear. There was only a quiet, terrifying certainty. The walk back to the human embassy was a silent one. The corridors of the galactic station were wide and clean, filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional strange, floating form of another species. Jin-soo walked stiffly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He did not look at Ji-hyun. The air between them was thick with things left unsaid. They passed through the secure archway into the human sector. The air changed instantly. It was slightly warmer, and the light was softer, designed to mimic the sun of Earth. The walls here were not cold metal, but a warm, off-white paneling. It was meant to be a comfort, a little piece of home. To Jin-soo, it felt like a lie. He finally stopped in the middle of the main common room. He turned to face Ji-hyun, his face a mask of controlled anger. "What was that, Ji-hyun?" he asked, his voice low and tight. "What did you think you were doing in there?" Ji-hyun walked over to a small dispenser and got a cup of water. Her movements were calm, too calm for Jin-soo's liking. "I was telling them the truth," she said simply. "The truth?" Jin-soo let out a short, harsh laugh. "They don't care about the truth. They care about power. They care about fleet sizes and plasma yields. You heard them. They laughed at you. They laughed at us." "I knew they would," Ji-hyun replied, taking a sip of water. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "They see our lack of orbital guns and they assume we are weak. They cannot comprehend a strength that isn't displayed on the surface, that isn't used for conquest." Jin-soo ran a hand through his graying hair, his shoulders slumping. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a deep, familiar weariness. He had been doing this for so long. He had been the one begging, negotiating, trying to prove humanity's worth to beings who saw them as insects. And what is this great hidden strength? Ji-hyun, our vibrant culture? Our poetry? Do you think the Xylos horde will be stopped by a sonnet? He sank into a chair, the fight gone from him. They are right, in a way. We are not warriors. Not like them. Ji-hyun placed her cup down on a table. The soft click echoed in the quiet room. She walked to the large, reinforced window that looked out onto the star-dusted blackness of space. The galactic core glowed in the distance, a swirl of unimaginable energy. "They build their strength out there," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She gestured at the stars, at the massive warships she knew were docked somewhere out of sight. "They forge it in orbital shipyards and power it with stolen suns. They think that is the only kind of strength that matters." She turned to face him, and the light from the window framed her, making her seem both small and immense. "We forged ours from within, Jin-soo. We had to. Our enemy gave us no other choice." Jin-soo looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the resolve in her eyes, a resolve that went beyond diplomatic training. It was something older, deeper. He had seen that look before, in the faces of the elders back on Earth, the ones who had lived through the worst of it. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They asked for our strategic value," Ji-hyun said. "We will give it to them. Not with engine schematics or weapon profiles. We will give them a story. Our story." A cold dread settled in Jin-soo's stomach. He knew exactly what she meant. "The archive," he said, the words feeling heavy. "You cannot be serious. That is, it's private. It's a memorial. It's not a weapon, isn't it?" Ji-hyun took a step toward him. "What is a weapon, Jin-soo?" Plasma cannon destroys a ship. A story can destroy an idea, can shatter a worldview. Their idea is that we are weak. We will shatter it. It's too great a risk, Jin-Soo argued, standing up again. To show them that vulnerability, they will see it as proof of our fragility. They will laugh even harder. Will they? Ji-hyun's question hung in the air. They laughed at me, a single human. Let them laugh at the millions. Let them laugh at the mountains of the dead. Let them try. I think they will find their laughter dies in their throats. She walked over to a secure panel on the wall. She pressed her hand against it. A scanner read her palm print and DNA. With a soft hiss, a compartment opened. Inside was not a data slate, but a simple, old-fashioned data crystal, the kind used on Earth centuries ago. It was housed in a plain, gray case. This is not a history lesson for them, Ji-hyun said, lifting the case gently. It is a revelation. They think a warrior is the one who deals death. We will show them that the true warrior is the one who fights to give life, even when surrounded by death. Jin-Soo stared at the data crystal. He remembered the stories his own grandparents had told him, stories passed down. The empty streets, the constant fear, the sound of ambulances that never seemed to stop, the faces on the news, covered in masks, exhausted beyond measure. You want to show them the gray death, he stated quietly. I want to show them the army that fought it, Ji-hyun corrected him. I want to show them the kind of spirit that such a foe forges. The Xylos horde seeks to break worlds through terror and force. They do not understand a species that has already had its spirit broken and remade itself stronger. They do not understand a people who know, in their very bones, how to survive the unsurvivable. She closed her hand around the data crystal case. Her knuckles were white. Forlak thinks a warrior is someone who can destroy a city, she said, her voice low and intense. I will show him warriors who would die to save a single person in that city. And I will make him understand which one of us is truly strong. Jin-Soo was silent for a long time. He looked from Ji-hyun's determined face to the data crystal in her hand. He thought of the laughter in the council chamber. He thought of the certain destruction the Xylos horde promised. They had tried everything else. Maybe she was right. Maybe their only remaining weapon was the truth of their past. He let out a long, slow breath. The fight was gone from him, replaced by a grim, reluctant hope. The archive, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. So be it. Ji-hyun gave a single, sharp nod. She didn't smile. There was no triumph in her eyes, only the heavy weight of responsibility. She was about to take the most painful, sacred memory of her species and offer it up to the scorn of aliens. She was going to use their greatest sorrow as their strongest shield. It was time. The next day, Ji-hyun walked back into the Galactic Council chamber. She walked alone. Jin-Soo was not with her. This was her task to finish. She carried no weapons. She held no detailed reports or complex treaties. In her hand was only the small, gray case containing the data crystal. The council members were already in their places. Councillor Forlak watched her approach, his large body leaning back in his seat. He looked bored. He expected more begging, more weak arguments. Ambassador Ji-hyun, Forlak's voice rumbled, the title sounding like a joke. Have you returned to amuse us further? Or does your senior colleague now find this task beneath him? Ji-hyun stopped in the same spot as the day before. She did not answer his question. Instead, she placed the gray case on the floor. She pressed a small button on its side. A holographic projector, simple and old, glowed to life from within the case. Councillor Forlak, she began, her voice clear and carrying in the vast room. You asked what foe we faced that could teach us about war. It was not an empire. It was not a horde of creatures. It had no mind, no strategy, no desire for conquest. A soft, whispering laugh went through the council. They were impatient. It was a virus, Ji-hyun said. The laugh grew louder. A virus? One of the council members, a being with slick, silvery skin, made a dismissive gesture. A pathogen? You speak of sickness? This is common. Any advanced species has nanomedicine to eliminate such trivial threats. Jihyun's expression did not change. This was before, she stated. The finality in her voice quieted the room a little. This was at a time when we had only our most basic science, our most fragile bodies, and our will. She tapped the control on the data crystal case. The hologram flickered to life above her. It did not show spaceships or explosions. It showed images and videos from a much older Earth. They were in black and white, and sometimes in shaky, grainy color. The council saw a world they barely recognized. They saw a city street, but it was empty of life. No vehicles, no people. Just trash blowing in the wind. They saw a large, open space being turned into a field hospital, with rows and rows of simple beds. The sheer number of them was difficult to comprehend. "This is what we called the Gray Death," Jihyun said. Her voice was flat, like she was reciting a terrible fact from a textbook. It did not simply kill. It isolated. It stole the breath from its victims. It forced mothers to die alone without their children. It forced sons and daughters to watch their parents through windows, unable to offer comfort. The hologram shifted. It showed a long, chilling line of refrigerated trucks parked outside a building. People in white protective suits were moving slowly, tiredly, between them. In 2 years, Jihyun continued, it killed over 100 million of our people. It did not care if you were a leader or a beggar. It targeted the old and the weak most fiercely, but it also took the strongest of our protectors. It was an enemy that attacked the very idea of community, of family. The council was quieter now. The images were unsettling. This was not glorious war. This was not a clean fight. This was slow, grinding, and deeply personal. It was a kind of suffering they had never considered. Forlak shifted in his seat. He found the images distasteful. "A tragic tale," he said, his voice losing some of its mocking edge but gaining a tone of irritation. "A planetary-scale illness is a terrible thing, but it is a matter of public health, not a war. It does not demonstrate strategic value." Jihyun looked directly at him. "Doesn't it?" she asked. Her finger moved on the control. The image changed again. It showed the inside of a hospital. The lights were harsh. The room was crowded. Every bed was full. The people in the beds were struggling, their breathing ragged. And moving among them were figures shrouded in white. Their faces were hidden behind masks and clear plastic shields. Their gowns looked like paper. "Then let me show you our army, counselor," Jihyun said, her voice hardening. These were our frontline warriors. The hologram zoomed in on one of the figures in white. The person was leaning over a patient, adjusting a machine. The exhaustion in their posture was so profound it was painful to see. The shield over their face was fogged with their own breath and smudged with tiredness. "The Xylos horde has soldiers in powered armor," Jihyun said. "Our soldiers had gowns that were no thicker than this." She held up the fabric of her own sleeve. "The Xylos have plasma rifles. Our warriors had syringes and oxygen tanks, and their own 2 hands. She changed the image. Now it showed a young woman, slumped over a desk in a hallway, fast asleep. Her head was resting on her arms. The marks of her tight-fitting mask were deep and red on her cheeks. A name was handwritten on a piece of tape on her gown. "Dr. Lee Mina. This is one of your warriors?" Forlak asked, his confusion genuine now. "A sleeping female? This," Jihyun said, her voice rising for the first time, "is Dr. Lee Mina." She had been working for 3 days with almost no rest. She had just helped save the life of a man she had never met before. She collapsed for 20 minutes, and then she got up and went back to her patients. "That is a warrior." The council chamber was utterly silent. The images kept coming. A man, his face grim, driving a bus. The bus was full of people, but they were all sitting far apart, their faces worried. The text at the bottom of the image read, "Kim Tae-shik, volunteer transport." They were not all doctors, Jihyun explained. This man was a driver. He volunteered to take sick people to the hospitals. He knew the risk. He did it every day. Another image. people standing on the balconies of tall apartment buildings. They were banging pots and pans, making a tremendous noise. They were cheering. The text said they were cheering for the healthcare workers. These were the people our warriors were fighting for, Jihyun said. They fought an enemy they could not see, in a battle that had no end in sight. They watched their friends and colleagues fall sick and die, and they stood their ground. Not for money, not for glory, not for territory. She paused, letting the images of the tired doctors, the volunteer drivers, and the cheering citizens sink in. They fought for the stranger in the bed next to them. They fought for the idea that a single human life was worth any sacrifice. That is the war we fought. That is the enemy we faced. And that is the army that saved us. The silence in the council chamber was heavy and complete. The images from Jihyun's projector still hung in the air. The exhausted face of Dr. Lee Mina. The determined eyes of the driver, Kim Tae-shik. The strange, sad spectacle of people cheering from their isolation. Counselor Forlak broke the silence. His voice was quieter than before, but it still held a thread of disbelief. A tragic tale, he repeated, as if the words were a shield. It shows a capacity for suffering, I grant you, but suffering is not a strategy. Sadness is not a weapon. The Xylos horde will not be moved by the memory of your sick and dying. Jihyun's calm finally cracked. It was not a large crack, but a small, sharp one. Her eyes, which had been so steady, now seemed to burn with a cold fire. You still do not see, she said, and her voice was low, but it cut through the room like a whip. You look at these images and you see only weakness. You see victims. I look at them and I see an army of the most formidable warriors this galaxy has ever failed to understand. She took a single step forward, her small frame seeming to grow taller. You measure strength by the power of a plasma cannon, she said, her gaze locked on Forlak. I measure it by the strength of a nurse who worked for 3 days without sleep, until her body gave out and she collapsed on a cold floor, only to wake up and beg to be allowed back to her patients. She pointed at the hologram of Dr. Lee Mina. You think a warrior is one who can destroy a city. I know a warrior is one who will die to save a single life in that city. Which one of us has the better measure of strength, counselor? Forlak had no answer. He stared at the image of the sleeping doctor. He tried to imagine one of his own soldiers doing such a thing. It was incomprehensible. The Grey Death was not defeated by a miracle. Jihyun continued, her voice rising, filling the space. It was not defeated by a hero with a sword. It was defeated by millions of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. It was defeated by sacrifice. The hologram changed. It showed a young woman, not much older than Jihyun, sitting on the floor of a hallway. She was wearing a protective gown. She was crying, but she was also putting that gown back on. This is Park Choi, Jihyun said, her own voice thick with emotion. She was a nurse. She had just been told that her mother had died from the virus. She was given permission to go home and mourn. She went to the locker room, she took off her gown, and she cried for 10 minutes. Then she put on a new gown and went back to her station. She told her supervisor that her patients needed her. Jihyun let that image hang in the air. The sight of the crying nurse, choosing duty over grief. That is discipline, Jihyun stated. That is a loyalty to a cause greater than oneself. That is the kind of soldier your armies can only dream of. A soldier who fights not because they are ordered to, but because it is the only right thing to do. She changed the image again. Now it showed a world map, with lines and arrows showing the movement of medical supplies, of food, of teams of doctors from one country to another, even when those countries had been enemies. The Grey Death did not care about our borders. So we erased them. We shared our data, our research, our resources. We did what was necessary for the survival of our species, not just our nation. We learned to cooperate on a global scale, under the most extreme pressure imaginable. She looked around the chamber, at the diverse and often divided faces of the council. The Xylos horde seeks to break you through fear and force. They will find it very difficult to break a species that has already learned how to unite in the face of a common, invisible enemy. They will find it hard to terrorize a people who have already lived through the end of their world and rebuilt it. Ambassador Kale, the avian-like counselor, leaned forward. His large, intelligent eyes were fixed on Ji-hyun. "You are saying your strength is not in your ability to attack," he said, his voice a soft, thoughtful chirp, "but in your ability to endure, your capacity for collective suffering and sacrifice." "Yes," Ji-hyun said, turning to him. The fire in her eyes softened into a grim certainty. "Exactly. While your fleets fight the Horde's front lines, we will be the unbreakable backbone. We will manage your supply lines when they are cut. We will maintain order and morale in your refugee camps. We will care for your wounded when your own medical systems are overwhelmed and collapsing." She finally looked back at Forlac. "You have soldiers who are experts in destruction. We have citizens who are experts in survival. We have lived through a crisis that never ended. We know how to ration hope. We know how to find strength in emptiness. The Xylos horde brings death. But we have already faced a foe that was worse than death. A foe that attacked not just our bodies but our very humanity. And we are still here." She stopped speaking. The only sound was the low hum of the chamber's life support. The images from the Grey Death were gone. The projector had shut off. But they were seared into the minds of everyone present. They were no longer looking at a fragile human girl. They were looking at the representative of a species that had been tempered in a fire they could not even imagine. A species that had looked into the abyss of its own extinction and had not blinked. The human embassy felt different when Ji-hyun returned. The air was no longer heavy with desperation. It was charged with a new, focused energy. Jin-soo was waiting for her. He stood as she entered, his face a mixture of hope and fear that he did not need to ask. He saw it in her eyes. The calm certainty had not changed, but the weight of the burden had lifted. She had done it. "They agreed," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "To everything." Jin-soo let out a breath he felt he had been holding for years. He sank back into his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "I listened to the open channel broadcast," he said. "I heard Forlac. I heard his voice when he called you ambassador at the end. It was different." Ji-hyun placed the gray data crystal case back into its secure compartment. She watched the door hiss shut. It felt like closing a tomb on a ghost that could finally rest. "It was not a victory," she said, turning to him. "It was an understanding. They finally understood the price we have already paid. They are not giving us a gift. They are asking to borrow our strength." On the main view screen, alerts were already flashing. Data streams from the Galactic Command flooded in. Schematics for supply routes, population charts for vulnerable worlds, requests for human logistical advisors. The work began immediately. It was not glamorous. There were no parades. On a screen, they watched as a massive galactic dreadnought moved to take up a defensive position near Pluto. It was a powerful, intimidating sight. But Ji-hyun and Jin-soo did not watch the dreadnought for long. Their attention was on the smaller, unmarked ships following in its wake. Ships carrying the first human teams. These were not soldiers. They were engineers like Kim Seo-jun, who had redesigned the oxygen recycling systems for 3 major cities during the Grey Death. They were logistics coordinators like Park Hannah, who had managed the distribution of food to millions of isolated people. They were crisis counselors like Lee Jun, who had developed methods to combat the deep loneliness and fear of indefinite quarantine. They were the army of the whitecoats, reporting for a new kind of duty. Weeks turned into months. The war against the Xylos horde raged on distant fronts. The galactic news feeds were filled with reports of battles, of heroics, of losses. But in the sectors where the human teams were deployed, a quiet revolution was taking place on a world called Kale. 4. A Xylos raid had shattered a primary power grid. Panic was spreading. The galactic officials were trying to restore order with announcements and threats. It was not working. Then a human team, led by a woman named Yoon Mi-cha, arrived. They did not talk about rules. They talked about procedure. They organized the citizens into groups. One group for clearing debris, another for distributing water from the working pipes, another for checking on the elderly and sick in the darkened buildings. They created a system out of the chaos, giving people purpose instead of commands. The panic subsided. On a galactic medical frigate overwhelmed with wounded. The chief surgeon was ready to give up. They were out of beds, out of supplies, out of time. Then a human medical advisor, a man named Choi Byung-hun, walked the halls. He saw the problem not as a lack of resources, but as a failure of flow. He reorganized the triage system. He showed the exhausted staff how to sterilize and reuse certain materials safely, techniques born from terrible necessity during the Grey Death. The frigate's survival rate increased by 20%. The reports trickled back to the Galactic Council. They were not the dramatic reports of a battle won. They were reports of a crisis managed, a supply line that did not break, a population that did not riot, a hospital that did not collapse. Counselor Forlack read these reports in his private chambers. He no longer saw the fragile human girl. He saw the ghost of Dr. Lee Mina in the actions of Yoon Mi-cha. He saw the determination of Kim Tae-shik in the resolve of Choi Byung-hun. He had thought the human story was one of past sorrow. He now saw it was a living, breathing manual for survival. One day, he summoned Jin-soo to his office. The old diplomat stood before him, calm and respectful. "Your people," Forlack said, gesturing to a data slate filled with positive reports. "They are effective. They are practiced, counselor," Jin-soo replied simply. "They are using skills they never wanted to learn, but are grateful to use for a greater good." Forlack was silent for a moment. "The ambassador, Ji-hyun, where is she now?" "She is on the orbital station above Tyrus II, counselor. The Horde blockaded the planet. She is coordinating the rationing of hope, as she calls it. She is making sure the people there know how to endure." Forlack nodded slowly. He looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the human who had changed his mind was doing the work she had promised. The work of a warrior. He had laughed at her. He had said she thought she was a warrior. He had been right. He just hadn't known what a warrior truly was. She had not come to fight his war. She had come to teach him how to win it. She had not doubted herself for a moment. She had known the strength of her people all along. She knew the power of a spirit forged in invisible fire. She knew HFY best. The silence in the council chamber was a physical thing. It was heavy and deep. The ghost of the crying nurse, Park Choi, seemed to linger in the air. The memory of the empty streets and the overflowing hospitals had stolen the breath from the room. Counselor Forlack did not move. His large, powerful body was still. His forearms rested on the console in front of him. He was not looking at Ji-hyun anymore. He was staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. In his mind, he was still seeing the face of Dr. Lee Mina, asleep at her desk. He was trying to fit that image into his understanding of the word warrior. It did not fit. It shattered his definition. He had led fleets. He had conquered worlds. He had seen soldiers die in glorious explosions of plasma and light. That was war. That was strength. What this human was describing was something else. It was darker. It was quieter. And he was beginning to fear. It was much, much stronger. He slowly raised his head. His multifaceted eyes found Ji-hyun. She stood alone in the center of the floor. She was not smiling. She was not triumphant. She simply waited. She had presented her case. The decision was theirs. Forlack's gaze swept across the other council members. He saw the same stunned confusion on their alien faces. He saw Ambassador Kale, who was nodding very slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. The Xylos Horde was a problem of force. They could be met with greater force. But it was a draining, costly war. It consumed ships and soldiers and resources at a terrifying rate. What if the humans were right? What if the real battle was not on the front lines, but behind them? What if the key to victory was not in destroying the Horde faster, but in outlasting them? He thought of his own supply lines, constantly harassed. He thought of the panic on conquered worlds, the breakdown of order that made them easy to digest. He thought of the hospitals on his own worlds, overflowing with the wounded, the medical staff stretched to the breaking point. And then he thought of the humans, a people who had managed global supply chains during a planet-wide catastrophe, a people who had maintained order in cities of the dead and dying, a people whose doctors and nurses and drivers had worked until they collapsed. Driven by a sense of duty, he could not comprehend that he saw it now, not as a story of sadness, but as a blueprint for resilience. Forlax stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. It drew every eye in the chamber. He was a massive figure, a being of pure physical power, and he was looking down at the small, seemingly fragile human who had just redefined strength for him. Ambassador Jihyun, he said. The title was no longer a joke. It was spoken with a new, heavy respect. The Galactic Council. He began, his voice a low rumble that held no trace of its earlier mockery. Has misjudged your species. He paused, choosing his words with care. We looked at your lack of great warships. We saw your short, violent history. We assumed this meant you were weak. We were wrong. He placed one of his large, clawed fists on the central console. It was a traditional gesture, a galactic sign of a solemn and binding agreement. We saw only that you had not built great weapons. We did not see that it was because you had to build something else first. You had to build a spirit that could not be broken. He looked at the other council members. One by one, they gave subtle nods of agreement. The laughter of the previous day was a distant, shameful memory. Your petition is granted, Forlax declared, his voice firm and clear. The Galactic Fleet will deploy a defensive screen to the Sol system. But that is not all. He leaned forward, his intense gaze fixed on Jihyun. We will integrate human crisis management teams into our core war strategy. Your people will not be on the front lines of battle. You will be on the front lines of survival. You will oversee our logistics and supply distribution. You will advise on civilian morale and infrastructure maintenance in besieged sectors. You will work with our medical corps to create systems that can withstand the chaos the Horde creates. He was not asking. He was stating a new reality. You will be the foundation that holds the line. You will be the shield that allows our sword to keep fighting.
Jihyun listened.
She did not react with joy or celebration. She simply absorbed the words. This was what she had come for. Not for glory for humanity, but for a chance to contribute in the way only they could. To use their greatest pain as their greatest gift. She gave a single, slow nod. The Human Alliance accepts this role, Counselor. We will not fail. Forlax looked at her for a long moment. The human who they had laughed at. The human who thought she was a warrior. She had not needed to prove her strength to him. She had only needed to show him that his own understanding of strength was childish and incomplete. She had not been a warrior in his eyes when she walked in. But she was one now. A different kind of warrior. A more dangerous kind. Because her weapon was not something you could see coming. Her weapon was an indomitable will, forged in a silent, desperate war against an enemy that could not be reasoned with, only endured. The meeting was over. The council members began to depart, their conversations hushed and thoughtful. Jihyun bent down and picked up the small, gray case. The archive was closed again. The memory was returned to its sacred rest. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her footsteps quiet on the polished floor. She had done it. She had made them see. She had known the truth of human strength all along. She knew HFY best.